Welcome Women's Rights National Historical Park and to our annual commemoration of Black History Month. Women's Rights National Historical Park tells the story of the first Women's Rights Convention held in Seneca Falls, New York on July 19th and 20th of 1848. It is a story of struggles for civil rights, human rights, and equality, global struggles that continue today. The efforts of women's rights leaders, abolitionists, and other 19th century reformers remind us that all people must be accepted as equals. We're also pleased to present with our good partner, the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse Museum, located just down the road in beautiful Farmington, New York. The museum preserves and interprets the 1816 Meetinghouse as a national site of conscience and a cornerstone of historic movements for equal rights, social justice, and peace, including rights for Native Americans, African Americans, and women, encouraging visitors to explore equality, justice, and peace in their own lives. I'd also like to recognize the National Park Foundation and their Accessibility Grant Fund. Our Signs for Success project has been fully funded for fiscal year 2025, allowing us to present all of our special event programs with the assistance of ASL interpreters. This weekend is such a win, being able to honor and celebrate Black history while making strides for accessibility for both deaf, hard of hearing, and blind low vision communities. We are joined today by Christopher of Interpretech. Please say hi to Christopher. And finally, we are so pleased to be joined today by Judith Wellman, who is graciously joining us from sunny Florida for this presentation. No envy or anything like that. Yeah. Judith Wellman is Principal Investigator of Historical New York Research Associates, Professor Emerita, State University of New York of Oswego, and President of the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse Museum. The author of The Road to Seneca Falls, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the First Women's Rights Convention. She was also the first historian at Women's Rights National Historical Park. Her work focuses on historic sites related to women's rights, the Underground Railroad, and African American life. She views historical work relating to equal rights as a contribution to a future of mutual respect and justice for all people. Our presentation today is how important were African Americans at the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention. Historians have long emphasized the abolitionist roots of the early women's rights movement, but they've also routinely ignored the importance of African Americans. A new look at the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention challenges that omission. Highlighting the lives of people of color who lived in Seneca Falls and Waterloo, Judith Wellman argues that several African Americans, many of whom had escaped from slavery on the Underground Railroad, almost certainly attended the first Women's Rights Convention. Please give a big welcome to Judy Wellman.
Thank you so much, Don and Christopher. Can you hear me okay?
We're good.
Well, welcome everyone. It's wonderful that you can be here and to think about this really important question. And we have a focus today on two basic thoughts. One of them is well documented, and it's the ways in which the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls was really rooted in abolitionism. The second one is based on circumstantial evidence, and it is that African Americans were present and important people at the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention. So I'm going to ask you to look at this evidence and think about your own reaction to it and what you think. Most of you already know about the Women's Rights Convention. It was the beginning of the organized women's rights movement in this country, including the struggle for women's rights to vote, July 19th and 20th, 1848. At the convention, the attendees signed a declaration of sentiments, which still echoes down to our time today. Patterned after the Declaration of Independence, it said, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal." And it included demands for equality in politics, in jobs, in the law, religion, personal respect, everything we still struggle with today. Historians have long emphasized the abolitionist roots of the women's rights movement, but they have also downplayed the involvement of African Americans in the early women's rights movement, and historians, including myself, have really ignored what I think was the presence of African Americans at that convention. So this presentation outlines the specific abolitionist connections of Elizabeth Cady Stanton that really were the sustaining force behind the convention. And it also suggests that several African Americans, many of whom had escaped on the Underground Railroad themselves, likely attended the Seneca Falls Convention. So, what do you think? And there will be a quiz. About 300 people attended the convention. All but one of the known attendees was white, and that person was Frederick Douglass. He's here as the only Black person amidst a sea of white people. 100 of the attendees signed the Declaration of Sentiments. There were 68 women and 32 gentlemen present in favor of the movement who signed the declaration. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was clearly the catalyst for this convention. She was determined to create a convention, as she said, solely to discuss the rights of women, and so the Declaration of Sentiments did not specifically mention race. But race was on everyone's mind, in part because of the presence of Frederick Douglass. Douglass had just returned from a wildly successful speaking tour in Great Britain and Ireland, and he was by then a nationally known figure. So it was an honor to welcome him to Seneca Falls in 1848. But if we look not only at Douglass, but of all those who came to the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention, I think we begin to see a much more nuanced recognition of the relationship between women's rights and abolitionism, between white attenders of the convention, and I think Black attenders as well. So this talk is going to argue that all the people we know who attended the convention had abolitionist roots, and several people of African descent almost certainly attended, hidden in plain sight. To understand how this convention emerged, we have to look first at Elizabeth Cady Stanton, because she had personal connections with friends and relatives who represented 4 different perspectives on abolitionism. Her cousin Gerrit Smith was nominated in June 1848 as president of the Liberty League. Her husband, Henry Brewster Stanton, was a big proponent of the new Free Soil Party and political abolitionism. Her friend Lucretia Mott was a representative of non-voting Quaker abolitionists, and Frederick Douglass represented Black abolitionists who were part of all 3 of those other movements. So what was Stanton's path to abolitionism? Well, she was born in 1815 in Johnstown, New York. She grew up in a household with at least 3 enslaved African Americans, including Peter Tebow, who was her main caregiver and who took her everywhere in Johnstown, including to the local courthouse. When she was a young woman, she spent time with abolitionist cousins Gerrit and Ann Smith in Peterborough. Peterborough, New York, was the site of the organizational meeting of the New York State Anti-Slavery Society, October 21st, 1835, and the Presbyterian Church where that group met is still standing. It's now the home of the National Abolition Hall of Fame. Stanton remembered that every member of their household is an abolitionist, even to the coachman. Her husband, Henry Brewster Stanton, was one of those people who was at Peterborough in October, a lovely fall day, 1839. They used to ride horses through the woods, and he proposed to her then. She married him against her parents' wishes in May 1840, and they attended on their honeymoon the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. The convention spent the whole first day debating whether or not American women who had been sent as delegates should be admitted to the convention. Can you guess what they decided? Henry Brewster Stanton said yes, they should, but the convention as a whole said no, they should not, which meant that the women were forced to sit together away from the convention floor and talk to each other. And we all know what happens when women begin to talk to each other. Elizabeth Cady Stanton got to know Lucretia Mott, who was an overwhelming influence on her. Mott lived out the idea of women's rights and freedoms that Elizabeth Cady Stanton had only dreamed of. She was part of a biracial Pennsylvania anti-slavery society that included several African American families, including the Douglas family, Fortin family, and Purvis families. 2 years later, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, walking in the streets of Boston, met Frederick Douglass. And as Douglass remembered later, he said, Mrs. Stanton, with an earnestness that I shall never forget, unfolded her view on this woman question. So from 1842 on, Frederick Douglass became a strong supporter of women's rights. So what was his path to that meeting with Stanton in 1842? He was born in Talbot County, Maryland in 1818. I think we can give credit to mostly his grandmother, Betsy Bailey, who raised him for his sensitivity to women's issues all of his life. He escaped when he was 20 years old in 1838, and 3 years later, he was attending an anti-slavery convention on the island of Nantucket, August 1841, and as he remembered, I felt strongly moved to speak. And from then on, his voice was heard like a trumpet through the world. A year later, he came to upstate New York as an abolitionist lecturer for the American Anti-Slavery Society. He traveled with Abby Kelly, who was a white woman, and he was obviously a black man. So they had chaperones, including Thomas McClintock and Margaret Pryor, who were Quakers from Waterloo. Abby Kelly spoke in Seneca Falls. None of the churches would allow her to speak, so she spoke in an apple orchard, Ansel Bascom's apple orchard. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass both settled in central New York in 1847. Cady Stanton came to Seneca Falls in June. She settled in this house, which is now part of Women's Rights National Historical Park. She got the house from her father, who gave it to her, says the deed, in consideration of the love and affection which I have for my daughter. Douglass moved to Rochester 6 months later in December. He started the North Star with the help of local Quakers, with the motto, right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the father of us all, and all men are brothers, and we might say now, and sisters. Both of them came to a region of the country that was in dramatic change. Historians talk about these changes as revolutions, and historians are usually modest and careful in their choice of words. So this must really have been a revolutionary area. Transportation from the Erie Canal to the railroads, industrialization with the development of factories, new cities, changes in family styles and gender roles. Upstate New York was consumed with this ferment of reform, said Alice Tyler. And many people called it the burned over district because it was so burned with fires of revivalism and reform. All of these reform movements involved not only European Americans, but also people of African and indigenous descent. And as you can see from the circle here on this map, Seneca Falls, Waterloo, and Rochester were at the epicenter of these changes. In 1848, we might call a year of revolution because the newspapers are just full of stories about the French Revolution, the German Revolution. The Seneca Nation formed its constitution in 1848, and one of the local businesses, Tyler and Underhill, advertised another revolution, great excitement at Seneca Falls, because they were getting consumer goods directly from New York City, including ready-made clothing. In June 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton rode these waves of revolution, bringing together 4 strands of abolitionism that became the basis for the world's first convention for women's rights. Her cousin, Gerrit Smith, was running for president on the Liberty League. And the Liberty League was the first political party that we know about to endorse women's suffrage. Their platform called for universal suffrage in its broadest terms, females as well as males being entitled to vote. Gerrit Smith was running for president on that platform. I think he probably stopped on his way from Peterborough to Buffalo, where the convention was held, overnight to stay with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Henry Brewster Stanton. And I can just imagine Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was a very competitive person, saying, I'm not going to let this man determined be the first person associated with asking for women's rights to vote. I'm going to do it myself. And I think that was a major factor in her insistence that that be one of the parts of the Declaration of Sentiments at the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention. Also in June 1848, the Free Soil Party was organized, and its purpose was to keep slavery out of the territories acquired from Mexico when the Mexican War ended in May 1848. And that includes all the states that are now part of the southwestern United States. The Free Soil Party swept Seneca Falls, and Henry Brewster Stanton, he called himself a free soil lion. He spoke to thousands of people across upstate New York, including one meeting in Canandaigua of 2,000 people the very day of the Seneca Falls Convention. Those free soil advocates became the single largest group of signers of the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments. About 1/3 of the 100 people who signed were free soil affiliated in some way. There were signatures of 400 free soil advocates in the Seneca County Courier in petitions supporting the Free Soil Party in the summer of 1848. And many of the homes of those free soil advocates are still standing. So you really begin to get a sense that this isn't like rich people or poor people. It's a cross-class movement of people who are dedicated to ideals of equality for all people. And finally, in June 1848, Lucretia Mott came to upstate New York to go to this 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse to meet as part of Genesee Yearly Meeting of Friends, which was a transnational meeting, including meetings from Canada as well as central and western New York. 200 reformers, about half of the meeting, walked out of this meeting, and they became the second largest group of signers at the Seneca Falls Convention. Important to that group was the McClintock family, and they had moved from Philadelphia to Waterloo in December 1836, lived in this house, which is also part of Women's Rights National Historical Park. Thomas McClintock became clerk of Genesee Yearly Meeting of Friends from 1838 to 1842. At that 1838 meeting, this group passed resolutions, or minutes as they were called, for supporting Seneca Indians in their fight to keep their land against the fraudulent Treaty of Buffalo Creek. They supported African American rights, anti-slavery, the Underground Railroad, and rights for free people of color. They also passed a minute supporting women's rights, and this is 10 years before the Seneca Falls Convention. The McClintock family was also very active in the Underground Railroad. They had 2 African American girls living in their home in 1850, says the census, and Reverend Jermaine Logan, who was minister of the African American Episcopal Zion Church in Syracuse, and also had escaped from slavery, had to go to Canada to escape in 1851, and he stayed with the McClintocks on the second floor, determined to die rather than be recaptured, walking in his room most of the night, and he was not going to be taken back into slavery. This group organized the Western New York Anti-Slavery Society in 1840 with many non-Quakers as well. They also sponsored women's anti-slavery fairs beginning on Washington's birthday, 1843. And using money from these fairs, they were the ones who helped pay for Frederick Douglass's expenses when he came to Rochester in 1847. Amy Post was one of the key organizers of those fairs, and she also was one of the key attenders at Seneca Falls and organized the second Women's Rights Convention in Rochester after Seneca Falls. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the catalyst for the Seneca Falls Convention, but these Quakers really were the organizers. They called people, or didn't call on phones, but they wrote to people. They acted as ushers. They found places for people to stay. They passed around the declaration for signatures. Without those Quakers, that convention would not have happened. So to summarize, June 1848 is the key turning point. When Gerrit Smith, Stanton's cousin, ran for president on the Liberty League Party, Free soil advocates, including her husband, Henry Brewster Stanton, left their traditional Democratic and Whig political institutions. Quakers, symbolized by Lucretia Mott, left their traditional lifelong religious institutions. Can you imagine what they were thinking? Someone who could say, I've been a Quaker all my life. What does it mean that I walked out of this meeting? If someone like Ansel Bascom saying, I've been a Whig all of my life, what does it mean to support free soil? And I think that they wondered what to do. And the very first opportunity that they had after those cataclysmic divisions in June 1848 to get together and talk to other people and hear what their leaders were saying was the Women's Rights Convention, July 19th and 20th, 1848. I think many of them came not because they knew much about women's rights necessarily, but because they needed a way to talk to their fellow reformers to figure out what to do next. Elizabeth McClintock and Lucretia Mott both sent notes to Frederick Douglass. Douglass responded to Elizabeth McClintock, to be sure, I'll do myself the pleasure of accepting your kind invitation to attend the proposed Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls. I think that one or two more of the Post family, the Quakers from Rochester, will be present also. Their result changed the world. So the question is, did local African Americans come to this convention? So far, we know the names of only one person of color, Frederick Douglass, who attended. I think it's very, very likely that several other people of color came to this convention. For one thing, it's hard to imagine that these people, reformers, Underground Railroad people, would have passed up the chance to meet Frederick Douglass. But many of them also had track records of attending Black state conventions, signing petitions. They were property owners. They had joined local biracial churches. So here are some people that I think likely came to the Seneca Falls Convention. 4 families in Seneca Falls, the Butler, Gomar, James, and Wright families, and 2 families in Waterloo, the DeMunn and Jackson families. Solomon Butler had been born in Maryland about 1800. He had his wagon and horse and met people when the trains arrived in Seneca Falls. He was so well known that there is a street named after Solomon Butler in Seneca Falls today. Abby Gomar, we have no picture of her, but we know quite a bit about her. She had been born in slavery about 1820. She attended Trinity Episcopal Church, which Elizabeth Cady Stanton also attended but never joined because of her scruples about women's rights and religion, she said. But her sons liked the fact that the minister wore a dress. Abby Gomar also owned property, and Cady Stanton included her in the history of women's suffrage as an example of a Black woman who paid her taxes and therefore should be able to vote. She had enough money to leave a bequest to Trinity Episcopal for the poor benefit of the poor and indigenous people. And she was also a women's rights advocate. She scorned tight lacing and trailing skirts, much like Elizabeth Cady Stanton herself did. Joshua Wright was one of 2 Black barbers in Seneca Falls. He was a freedom seeker from Maryland. A white historian, local historian, later recalled the sound of 6 church bells ringing together Sunday mornings, gladdening the hearts of the refugees, Barbara James and Barbara Wright. And Joshua Wright was active in abolition. He signed a petition for free soil. He was a property owner. He was a trustee of the Wesleyan Chapel. He and his two wives are buried with other Wesleyans in Springbrook Cemetery. Thomas James and his wife Sarah and his daughter Martha all lived in this house in Seneca Falls. Thomas James in 1850, the census said, "Where are you born?" And he says, "I don't know." But his daughter Martha, who was 10 years old, was born in Canada. So that's a clue that he had escaped from slavery himself. He also owned property. He was another trustee of the Wesleyan Chapel. He signed abolitionist petitions. He subscribed to anti-slavery newspapers, and his whole family is buried in Seneca Falls as well. We know that he knew Elizabeth Cady Stanton because in 1852, Stanton was part of the dress reform movement, and she decided, along with about a dozen other white women in Seneca Falls, to get her hair cut so it would be easier to take care of. And she went to James the barber as part of her this emphasis on health and dress reform. By the 1860s, Thomas James was quite a wealthy man, and he built a business block in Seneca Falls that's still part of the bank that's at the corner of Fall Street and Cayuga. And there were a couple of articles in the paper specifically identifying him as a fugitive slave, and one of them said he owned $12,000 to $15,000. In Waterloo, Mary Butler DeMunn was daughter of Solomon Butler in Seneca Falls, and she married Hiram DeMunn, who was active in Black organizations in New York State. She probably, like her father, was born in Virginia and was a freedom seeker. The DeMunn family lived next to Azaliah and Margaret Schooley on Walnut Street in Waterloo, and the Schooleys were white Quakers living in Waterloo, also signers of the Declaration of Sentiments. Down the street lived the Jackson family, Thomas Jackson, born in Maryland, Mariah Jackson, born in New York State. And Thomas Jackson was signer of an anti-slavery petition, subscribed to Frederick Douglass papers. He actually sued 3 Quakers for labor damages, and he won. And the family was also members of the Biracial Disciples of Christ Church in Waterloo. The Jacksons, throughout their sojourn in Waterloo, were strongly associated with the McClintocks. Here is a membership list for the Waterloo Female Temperance Society in 1841, thanks to the Waterloo Historical Society. You can see Elizabeth McClintock's name is at the top of the list on the left-hand side. Mariah Jackson and her daughter Mary Jackson were also members and listed here toward the bottom of that list. In 1857, they moved to a new and much more substantial home. The home was in Mariah Jackson's name, and I've wondered if it was to protect their property under the Married Women's Property Act, because Mariah could then own property in her own name, just in case her husband Thomas got recaptured and sent back to slavery. And their daughter Mary also purchased property in her own name. A lot of people in this group were affiliated with the Wesleyan Methodists, and they become key not only as the site in which the convention was held, because they were the only large place to meet in the area that allowed reform conventions. They were organized in 1843 on anti-slavery principles. And this church in Seneca Falls was the largest Wesleyan church in the entire upstate New York region. And that was organized with a hierarchy neither of power nor of color. It also had at least 6 African American members, including the 2 freedom seekers who were the barbers, Joshua Wright and Thomas James. They were not only members, they were also trustees of this building. And many freedom seekers, as well as free people of color, spoke here. Here's a list of some of them, as you can see. The ministers of this church were active Underground Railroad activists, and they lived in this house the parsonage, which is still standing on Minder Street, right behind the Wesleyan Chapel. Frederick Douglass is an example of someone who spoke here on abolitionist ideas, and he says the house was crowded with a very respectable audience. With such an audience and such a subject, it's impossible to be cold and lifeless. We can just imagine the passion with which he spoke. He had a 2-hour meeting and he got 8 subscribers to the North Star. So here is your quiz. Given what you now know about the abolitionist roots of the Seneca Falls Convention, including the presence of Frederick Douglass there, about the African-American families who lived in Seneca Falls and Waterloo, and about the biracial Wesleyan Methodist Church where the convention was held, do you think it's likely that African-Americans from the local area attended the convention, even though they did not sign the Declaration of Sentiments? I'm not able to hear anyone's response, but it's a question to think about and to share and to discuss with others. The evidence is circumstantial. We have no one locally. Mary Jackson did not say in her diary, which she didn't keep, I attended the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention today, but it seems the argument that I'm making is it seems more likely than not that they did attend that convention. So what happened afterwards? Well, the Seneca Falls Convention became a turning point not only for women's rights, but also a kind of nest for people committed to universal reform. Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments tied women's rights directly to, the American democratic tradition by tying it directly to the Declaration of Independence. And it initiated dramatic public debate across the country, north, south, west, east. It also strengthened the alliance between abolitionists and women's rights advocates. One example of the way in which this alliance began to transcend not just abolitionism, not just women's rights, but to create a sense of universal rights, equal rights for all people, happened in the fall of 1848, October 7th, at the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse. There, a group of men, women, blacks, and whites, and maybe Native people too, created a coalition that embraced equal rights for everyone. They called it the Congregational Friends. They invited Elizabeth Cady Stanton to give the keynote address, which she did, and passed around a petition for suffrage at the end. In 1854, Frederick Douglass published a call to their annual meeting, and this encompasses their basic beliefs. The platform, they said, is broad and comprehensive, admitting the most perfect liberty of conscience. An assembly in which Christians, Jews, Mohammedans, and pagans, by which they meant Seneca, Haudenosaunee people who were not Christians, men and women of all names and no name, may labor together for the promotion of human love with rights with no other law but the law of love. In 1866, that group became the prototype for the American Equal Rights Association, which was organized to secure, after the Civil War, equal rights to all American citizens, especially the right of suffrage, irrespective of race, color, or sex. And it included people like Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Mott, by then Sojourner Truth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, by then Susan B. Anthony. This group worked all their lives for equal rights for all people, including people of color, Haudenosaunee people, and other Native people, and women. But obviously, they left a lot of work undone. So it's interesting to look once more today at the Declaration of Sentiments. It's well worth reading. Every demand listed there, including rights to vote, still remains an issue for us and for people around the world. The men and women at Seneca Falls struggled toward a vision of equal rights, of justice, of respect for all people. So how do we take that legacy today? And what do we do with it? The future is up to us, and that's a question I'll leave with you. And thank you so much for being here.
Here we go. Let's try again. And Judy, you were joined by about 9 more people, so we had a total of about 12 here. So really
Oh,
good.
wonderful. Yes.
I'm gonna ask if anyone has any questions. I'll have to, the speaker's up here, the microphone's up here. So if you do have any questions, I can relay those to Judy. Anybody got any questions? No pressure.
Ask, do people think, do you buy this argument based on circumstantial evidence that African Americans probably were at the Wesleyan Chapel on that 2 days of Seneca Falls Convention?
You guys do thumbs up or thumbs?
I'd love to know.
I think we're about 80%, 90%. Yeah. So, yeah. I think so. It totally makes sense. I can't, yeah. I can't understand why it wouldn't work that way. Yes.
My question is,
Her question is, why would we doubt that there were other African Americans there?
Well, we have no evidence that anyone came. We know there were about 300 people because of estimates about where they sat and the place being full and how much the chapel actually held. We also know that only 100 of them signed the Declaration of Sentiments. And of those, we still don't know 12 people because they were all women, probably got married and might as well be lost to the historical record. So none of them except Douglas that we know of were people of color. So that's the evidence that's solid. But it does seem to me, particularly since Thomas James and Joshua Wright were actually trustees of the Wesleyan Chapel, that they would not have come to the convention as a reform convention and to meet Frederick Douglass. It just seems, if we have to pick a choice of what makes the most sense, connecting the dots around the gap that's in the middle of this picture, the dots seem to me to suggest that they would have come. And I think we tend to, I don't know if this is the right phrase or not, but to whitewash the past because we don't see people of color walking around Waterloo much today. We kind of assume there weren't people of color there, but they lived there, they worked there, they knew people, they went to church with whites and blacks, they're buried next to each other. I think it's Solomon Butler was the person who took everybody to where they needed to go after they got off the train. I think it's important that we begin to realize how integrated so many people of color were into this dominant culture, white area in Seneca Falls and Waterloo, and also how much they were connected to other people of color and other reformers of whatever color across New York State through marriage, through Black state conventions, through signing petitions. It's important to try to understand the world from their perspective and not just from ours.
Very well, thank you. Any other questions? One more big round of applause for Judy.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Let me give a
Thank you,
big round of applause to
Christopher.
Christopher.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Judy, I cut you off.
No, I was going to say thank you to Christopher for the translation too. Appreciate it.
Welcome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I do encourage you to please be careful. The snow is coming and coming and coming. Thank you so much for joining us here at Women's Rights National Historic Park and for the cooperation and work with the 1816 Farmington Quaker Meetinghouse. We very much appreciate it, and I hope everyone enjoys and can commemorate Black History Month all month long. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.